We can now bring in Yossi Mekelberg, a Senior Consulting Fellow, Middle East and North Africa Program at Chatham House. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24 today. Now, you just heard there from our correspondent, former Jerusalem correspondent, Cyril, that we've seen celebrations break out on the Gaza Strip. We've also had hostage families in Israel who've been celebrating, but some within in the country are protesting this deal. Those divisions which we're seeing in Israeli society clearly reflected in Benjamin Netanyahu's own government. Could those far-right elements scuttle this deal?
Thank you for having me. I think a small minority in Israel opposes this deal, as is the case among Palestinians. I think there is even more than sense of celebration month. We saw so much death and devastation and destruction. And yes, there are some that oppose this, but if you go survey after survey for many months, most Israelis say that they preferred a deal that will see the hostages back, a ceasefire, they see the hostages back, and continue the war, even for what Netanyahu described as a total victory.
Yossi, you and I have spoken in the past, and experts like yourself have alluded to the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu was dragging out this war for his own political survival. Has his calculus changed now that his friend Donald Trump is back in the White House?
And that's exactly where the calculus changed. Had there been a different administration, maybe it was continue the same approach of continuing the war, because Netanyahu stays in power as long as he disrupts the system, as long as there is an external enemy in which position himself, at least in his own eyes, and enough people that support him as the defender of the savior of Israel. But Trump changed the calculus, and he said very clearly that he wanted that until he assumed power next week in the White House, that this issue is off the table. So it's not obviously completely off the table, but the first and very important step is in the process now. Hopefully it starts on Sunday. And in the balance of, if you would like, fear between how the far right going to react and the wrath of Trump, he preferred to do as Trump asked him to do.
Yesterday, we had Marco Rubio, who's Donald Trump's pick for Secretary of State, who had his confirmation hearing over in Washington. And he said that Donald Trump was going to be the most pro-Israeli U.S. president, the country had seen. Given that, do you think that we could potentially one day, if firstly the ceasefire does, get agreed to, get rubber stamped on the Israeli side, that potentially one day we can talk about a two-state solution?
I think the question, what does it mean to be pro-Israeli or even pro-Palestinians? I think what we should be pro is pro-peace, pro-coexistence, and pro-reconciliation between the people. If there is any lesson to be learned from the last 15 months, it's letting conflict to fester and in the disaster, that without a political solution, it's actually ordinary people that pay the heaviest of prices. So being pro-Israel is not only supplying more weapons, is not only saying whatever the government says to support it, but actually help Israel to end this conflict in the way that will reduce motivation in the region for such a war. Because there at the same time lying great opportunities in peace, not only because of improving the relations between the Israel and Palestinians, but how it's going to pan out in the rest of the region. So I think talking about pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian, those are quite empty mantras. What needs is actually to move quickly to reconstruction of Gaza, starting a peace process that will end the conflict.
Yesterday, there were some reports in Israeli media that Benjamin Netanyahu has no intention of reaching phase 2 of any potential deal. Where do you think, what's his thinking according to you?
Well, it's difficult to know, because one of the things that always interrupt and interfere within his thought process is his corruption trial. If, for instance, in order to derail his corruption trial, he thinks that he needs to stay in power. and weaken the democratic system, the judiciary system. Now, this is what makes him so vulnerable to pressure from the far right. The far right, as we know, is against the deal. We don't know if they are going to stay in government or leave. But the fact is, there is an agreement now that was announced first by the Qatari Prime Minister, and then was confirmed by the current American president and President-elect Trump. Is Netanyahu going actually to violate such an agreement? I hope this is not the case. But if there is any of the side, by the way, try to retract from this agreement, then they should face the international community.
And they clearly will, because Donald Trump does want to have good news before he takes office. So clearly he will be under pressure anyways.
So that's exactly the point. Again, this is a long process. We were just entering from Sunday 6 weeks of the first phase, and then in 16 days into this negotiation will be hopefully resumed in order to deal with end of war, the release of the rest of the hostages. So we're just at the beginning, but this is a process. While at this time the new administration will be in place, and then they will have to decide how they deal if any of the sides decides to violate it. Hopefully this is the case. I think today, just for a day, we can be constructively and cautiously optimistic.
I hope you're right. Yossi Mekelberg, thank you very much for that. Yossi joining us there from London.